Okay, everyone, thank you for clicking on the class. This is volume 3 of the bass class. It's October, so we're going to be going over schooling fish 101, and we're also going to be talking a little more in depth about crankbaits and jerkbaits as well. Not necessarily about brands or, why one works better than the other, but basically all the different attributes of them and why certain ones behave the way they do and how you should fish them. So we're going to get right into that and not dilly-dally and talk some schooling fish first. So basically, this is what all of us look for this time of year, and really any time of year except for the spring. In here in North Carolina in the South, we're looking for those big pods of fish that are all around the lake, in the backs of the creeks, in the main lake channels. It's an opportunity to really catch a lot of fish really quick when they're up feeding this aggressively, and all our eyes are kind of drawn to it when we hear something bust or when we see a school of shad come to the surface. We're waiting for this to happen, and this particular picture is actually striper feeding, but it's the best one I could get in clarity to show, bass just going bananas on the surface. So that's what we're looking for, and you're also looking for that. At least around here, we have a lot of seagulls on our lakes, and they will also tell you where the schooling fish are sometimes before they'll even show it on the surface themselves, because they're looking for the shad as well. Believe it or not, the seagulls do eat shad off the surface, and they have excellent eyesight. And when they start diving like that, it's usually one thing and one thing only, and they're on a pot of bait fish. So this is what you want to look for when you see this. It's an opportunity to run over there or get close enough to cast on it and catch pretty much any fish in the school, because they're going to be so opportunistically feeding, they'll hit almost anything you put in them. But there's a couple baits you can do, or use in this opportunity that'll be better than others, and we're going to talk about that. But first of all, we're going to talk about how to find schooling fish. And if you're around the Charlotte, North Carolina area, this is Mountain Island Lake, and it's a small lake, which is why I choose it to break this stuff down. Lake Norman and Lake Wiley are pretty big. Lake Norman is massive. So taking a smaller lake like this one is easier to break down when we're talking about anything to do with a map. So we're going to talk about Mountain Island in this instance. If you're going to find schooling bass, these are the areas that I'm going to think about first as having the possibility of having a school come up or having a school be midway through the column or even on the bottom in the winter. So we're going to talk about all three of those phases, not just on the surface. Bass will school in the thermocline area about halfway down. They'll also school on the bottom, especially in the winter. So the first main area is any major bridge. That is the Highway 16 bridge that crosses over Mountain Island Lake. It's a pinch point, and it's a crossing over the main river channel where any fish that come from the dam upstream or upstream down to the dam have to come through. It's a great place for them to lay up and ambush shad. Everything that goes south has to come through there. They know that. Excellent place to have your electronics out to find bait fish and to find bass underneath them. And in the morning and the evenings now in the fall and through midwinter, fish will come to the top and school there as well. So think about your bridges first. Are the easiest thing to find on your map other than the dam. So think about bridges first, and this is the only one on Mountain Island on the lower end where you have deep water. So bridge, number one thing to think about. And number two thing to think about is that entire lower end of the lake, basically where the water has slowed down. The water is typically a lot clearer and at its deepest. So the bait fish can suspend out here really easily. The water is not disrupted by current as much, and there's a lot of space down there for them to spread out. These shad are really small. They're working as strength in numbers kind of guys right now, and there's a lot of places for them to run around down there If the bass find that out, they'll be down there, even over those deep waters near the dam, 40, 50 feet, and they'll be running them not only to the surface, but they'll be pushing them at that 10 to 20 foot area where all the oxygen is right now. As we transition into fall and into winter, that water will mix, and there's no telling where the fish could be running around, but right now that oxygen is in that top layer, and that's typically where all your bait fish are going to stay. Usually around here it's no deeper than 20 to 30 feet. Once you get below 30 feet right now, there's not a lot of oxygen in that water, and the bait fish can't survive, so the bass aren't going to be there either. So another place is to check the dam. And the third place is any secondary point, and this is the first cove going upstream away from the bridge that you really come to that has a good hard secondary point. You can see it there, the little fish icon. Apparently somebody has dropped a point there saying there's good fishing there on Navionics web app. If you don't use Navionics web app, look it up. It's an excellent tool to plan accordingly for any kind of fishing trip and kind of figure out what the depths are before you go. Anyway, that secondary point right there is really close to the main channel as well. If you can tell, it's probably not even, I don't know, 150 yards. So excellent spot for fish to gang up and school up, not only in the fall and winter, but in the summer as well. So really easy to find those secondary points. If you look at the map, you can see them. It's wherever a major cove forks and a point sticks out into deep water. You can see that light blue color there in the cove, goes right by that point. That's the creek channel. That means that's a highway for bait fish and bass. There's a point there, perfect little gang spot. Think about your secondary points too. So the creeks, our major creeks on our reservoirs here in the south, are another excellent place to find schooling fish due to the fact that they're oxygen rich and they're nutrient rich, so the shad love them. This creek in particular is Gar Creek. It has a smaller drainage than the other creek we're getting ready to talk about. Comes through a really, really good forested area. Stays a little bit cooler, a little bit smaller, and will always have cool water in the back of it. Shad know this. So in the fall, in October and November, it's going to have cool water full of oxygen and nutrients. They're going to push back there and the bass are going to follow them. So you can kind of follow the bass from the main channel of the river into that first kind of open cove area of Gar Creek right there where the words Mountain Island are on the map in that creek. And they'll probably stop there first as the shad move their way back into the creek. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rules, but if I had to check first, I would check in that area. And then possibly, if I'm not liking what I'm seeing, if I'm looking for cooler water, looking for more moving water, you can slide back past the pinch point there in the middle where the word lake is and check that other area in the back. It's going to be a lot shallower, probably going to be a little bit more stained, a little bit more lacking of clarity, but there'll be more nutrients back there and places for the shad to kind of hold up. So check the front, check the back as the season progresses. Excellent place to find schooling fish this time of year. Also, this major turn in Mountain Island. Mountain Island makes, almost a 180 degree turn right there. And because of such, it has this really good flat on its eastern side here in that bend where you see those two little red fish indicators again. Apparently there's some fish in the areas there that guys have placed. But anyway, there's a shallow flat over there where the current from the river coming from up there in the northwest part of the picture comes hammering down when they let the water out of Lake Norman, which is the big reservoir north of this, which they frequently discharge into Mountain Island Lake. Mountain Island's pretty small compared to Norman. So when the water comes screaming down that river and makes that hard turn, it kind of allocates those shad and those bait fish into that flat area where, they're getting that current, but there's a little break there. It spreads out. It's an excellent place for fish to slide up there and feed. Like I said, especially in the mornings and late in the evenings, depending on what the bait fish are doing. But don't ignore your major turns in your river where those flats are smushed off to the side where the big hard turn is. And you can see this again in Navionics when you follow the really light colors of the river channel, and then you see those little bit darker colors right beside it, and that form that flat. You can kind of see how it behaves. Excellent spot to look. Another key area to find when you're looking for schooling fish. And again, the other major creek in this lake, which is McDowell. This is the bigger drainage creek. Comes from a lot different area though. This particular creek comes from a lot more developed area of North Charlotte kind of area. And it also has a wastewater treatment plant on it about a mile upstream from where the cove kind of turns into creek. So that wastewater treatment plant always has flow coming out, always has nutrient-rich water being pushed in there, and the shad know that. So that water will be a little cooler, not as cool as the water in Gar Creek because this is treated and coming off impervious area. So it's a little bit warmer. However, it's full of nutrients, and the shad will go and slide up in there and have a good area to feed on the plankton and things like that. And a little bit more stained, but it's a great place to go find bait fish and bass. Typically when I find them schooling in there, it's at dusk. I don't know why, but I don't know if that's a situation where the bass are so close to that main river that they're out there first and then they slide back in. Don't know why, but that area seems to have schooling fish in the fall, October, November, at dusk better than at dawn. So just a little tip there if you're going to go to McDowell. If you're in a boat, if you're in a kayak, run back here around dusk and just check and make sure they're not busting, because typically they'll be in the very back of that pinch point right as you're losing the light, feeding on those shad. But anyway, the basics of finding your schooling bass in this particular area are look at your major creeks, look at your big turns in the river where you make a flat where current can slide right by it. And then our final part where I feel like a lot of people forget about is right behind the dam in a reservoir. And this happens to be the top of Mountain Island, right below the Lake Norman Dam. And this is going to be all based on current. So when that dam is running, it forms an entire new environment up there where those fish are positioned based on the current. The shad are positioned based on the current. They're more predictable. When that water's not running, it's a little more unpredictable. It's hard to figure out where exactly they're going to come up in school. But when they're cranking that water on, it's really easy to find them. So you see where the discharge comes from. Right here on Navionics, you see all your white water over here on that left side of that red circle. And that's the cauldron, the deep water hole where all those currents have come through there for so many years. And that's where your oxygen's going to get pushed and the fish are going to come flood to that area and school right there when those shad get kicked up. One thing I will talk about with this is just be safe. If you're in a kayak, try to run up there when it's not on and figure out some good spots to be in safely where you can fish comfortably when it does come on. It's basically a situation where they could turn this dam on anytime with only a minimal notice. So you need to really be safe when you're fishing behind dams. But if you can be safe, if there's not a problem with safety and you're comfortable with where you're located, whether you're in a boat or a kayak, it can be some great fishing. But put safety first in mind up here, guys. And the second spot, here goes another bridge. This is a Highway 73 bridge. It crosses the river right here. Another good place for the fish to gang up. When the current does come on, pushes by those bridge pilings, pushes those shad down. Those bass can, kind of come up from that bridge area and feed on those shad. So anywhere up there that's controlled by current that has some kind of central structure to hold those bass and give them a place to hide until they want to come up and feed, excellent place to look at. So if you're going to run up north to any of our lakes that have a safe enough dam area, this is kind of the place you want to look for when you're talking about schooling fish in October and November. So if you're going to find schooling bass, you're also going to want to know where your discharges are. And that's hot water, the dam, and any wastewater treatment plant. So with our 3 lakes we have here in Charlotte that everybody fishes, we have 2 hot water discharges on Lake Norman. That's McGuire down around the Blythe Landing area and kind of near the dam. We have the Marshall plant, which is kind of near Highway 150 up around Mooresville. And then, of course, the Lookout Dam. So there's Lookout Reservoir, Lookout Lake, Lookout Shoals, whatever you want to call it. that's above Norman. So when it does discharge, if you can get up the river in Norman safely, you will have flow that'll position shad and position bass. Same thing with Mountain Island, which we just went over. You have the McDowell wastewater treatment plant, and you have the Norman Dam. Those are the two flows that come into Mountain Island. And then Wiley, which is south of Mountain Island, downstream, you have the Allen Steam Station discharge, which is in the South Fork River. It's a hot water discharge, and as well as the Catawba Nuclear Station, which discharges into the Big Allison Creek area down the south end of the lake, which is also a hot water discharge. The Mount Holly wastewater treatment plant is way up in the lake. It's way up almost near the dam. It's right across from the Whitewater Center there in the river. It's constantly discharging as well, and it usually positions shad pretty well. And then the Mountain Island Dam, which once you get above Highway 85 on Lake Wiley, you're basically in river, and that whole area can be driven by a discharge from the Mountain Island Dam. So knowing where these discharges are will also help you plan out a trip and plan out where to try to find moving water that you can try to hunt down shad in this time of year, based on if it's warm, if it's not. But these things need to come into play when you're trying to figure out a location to go look for schooling fish. So what does it look like on our electronics? Most fishermen now, even kayak fishermen more so now, have really good electronics on their boat. Trying to figure out how to read them and look at fish versus look at schooling actively fish under your boat. Typically when you run over a school of fish, like in the left picture, you don't know whether they're schooling or not. You know they're there, you know about how big they are, you know how far they are from the top of the water, you know how far they are from the bottom of the lake, but you don't know what their behavior is. If you look in the right picture, you know what the behavior is. Those lines are streaking all over the place. What's going on there is there's a lot of schooling activity. There's a lot of aggression. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of fish streaking up and down chasing shad. So when you see a picture like you have on the right, you need to drop down a spoon or something, a drop shot in there. Looks like at about 15 feet to 20 feet there, because there's a lot of activity going on. And then you'll realize what species they are and how big they are. But that's money when you see that. And look at the water temp, guys. 55.8 degrees. I don't even know where this picture is from. Doesn't matter. Right now we are in the low 70 water degree temperature, so we got plenty of time to assess this and hopefully catch schooling fish for the next month or so. So this is what it looks like on side imaging. You can see in the picture the smaller tight little pieces right here, that's your shad. So they're usually going to be in balls of a school, strength in numbers kind of thing. And then these other fish are your predator fish. They could be white perch, white bass, largemouth, crappie, doesn't matter, but they're spread out a little bit more, and usually they are under the shad. And what they'll do is they'll pick them off as they get up next to them, and eventually, depending on what species of predator fish it is, they're eventually going to bust up through them and feed them. Now, whether they make it to the surface or not, you don't know, but that's a party getting ready to happen right there. If you see that on your screen, you have shad and you have predator fish ready to go. So good thing to see. If you just see the shad, that's great, but you really want to try to find those predator fish, getting ready to gang up on them as well. That is getting ready to turn on right there in that picture. So same thing here. This is what it looks like side imaging versus your 455 down scan versus regular old 200 kilohertz sonar, which everybody's used. You can kind of tell the difference. Those fish are really relating to the bottom. Could be perch, could be largemouth, could be crappie, but they're not really actively schooling right now. Doesn't mean they won't bite, but they're not coming up. There's no shad around them right now for them to draw up. but they are really, really relating to the bottom. So this is how you would want to position your spoon, your deep diving crankbait, 22 feet deep. So if you can get down to 17, 18 feet with whatever you're using, a big football jig, a Carolina rig, whatever, it tells you how those fish are relating all the way across. You can see the side imaging has a lot longer profile. You can see what they've been doing for further distances, but your other two windows to the right there just confirm of where those fish are. Looks like they're staying right there around 17 and lower, so adjust your bait accordingly, how you present to them, but those fish are probably catchable. So now we're going to talk about following schooling bass. So this time of year, October, November, even in Charlotte, early December, we're fortunate enough to have a little bit longer fall. Depending on the year, every year is different, but we don't have a hard winter typically until January. So in October, November, and early December, as a generic rule, if something changes, I'm going to stay in that 5, 10, 15, 20 foot range. Those fish are going to be schooling in the backs of creeks, off points. They're typically not going to be schooling really deep yet as a group. The shad aren't going to be there either. And we talked about this. This is because the surface waters are still, cooling off. The oxygen is still up there. It hasn't mixed really well yet. But as you get colder and you go into mid-December, January, and February, way before pre-spawn, the fish are going to be the bass, the spotted bass and the largemouth are going to be holding out in those deeper zones. Even deeper than this, really. I've caught fish in 40 to 50 feet. But typically in the fall, as a general rule, in the green zone over here to the right, you're going to be looking at that 0 to 20 foot range. Deeper than that, there's probably not going to be many bait fish due to the oxygen situation until maybe December, and then you'll slide out. So think about this particular image, follow those schooling bass as they move from the shallows chasing the shad to when it gets really cold and they suspend out a little bit deeper, but you can still catch them, guys. If you can get down to them with a spoon or a drop shot or something like that, those fish, if you locate them, you can still catch them. But this is a generic rule that I've used to follow the schooling fish through the season. So, how are you going to catch them? These are my top producers for the fall, which, if you remember, is this area. So, the 0 to 20 feet. My top producers are going to be things that stay on top and things that stay shallow, or that are versatile enough that I can keep them shallow or yank them down a little deeper if needs be. This is where your favorite top waters come into play, whether they're moving, stutter stepping, soft plastic fluke, whatever you like to fish. Make sure you can throw it a pretty good ways, just in case they come up schooling right outside of your reach. But make sure they're going to stay shallow and mimic the forage. Typically, it'll be shad. It could be blueback herring, could be alewives, things of that nature. Typically, around here, we're going to be mimicking threadfin shad this type of year. So, smaller schooling baits are going to get bit more. But if you step up a little bit to a super spook or something like that, you will have the potential to pull up bigger bites, or a big whopper plopper or something like that. Always have a spoon with you. I can't stress this enough. Figure out how you like to fish a spoon, which spoons you like to fish. They're just so versatile this time of year. You can throw them a long ways. You can crank them on the surface. You can crank them on the bottom. You can vertical jig them. I don't think they get quite the attention they deserve this time of year. A jigging spoon, most definitely. They're just fish catching material, and this time of year they're super valuable to have on your boat. Just keep that in mind. But these are all the different baits. Typically you want them, they can be fished from the surface down around 10 to 15 feet. That's going to be perfect through about November, maybe December like we talked about. But when you go colder for the quote-unquote winter in Charlotte, in the area, you're going to be looking more at vertical fishing because it's so deep. There's going to be very few things you can fish horizontally through them. An Alabama rig, maybe a deep, heavy jig head with a grub or a swim bait on it. Most of the time, to be more efficient, we're going to find them on our depth finder and we're going to drop something to them. A deep diving crankbait will work if you control it, if you can get it down 17, 18, 20 feet. But most of the time, we're going to be using vertical jig things. So, again, drop shot, Alabama rig, if you can get it down that far, a big old hair jig, deep diving crankbait, a heavy silver buddy, and an underspin. You can fish slow, and then you spoon again. May need to upsize a little bit, get it down deeper, faster, and make it more effective, but a spoon needs to be with you from right now through March, through February at least. So again, to summarize that, baits that can be fished deep, either vertically or horizontally, are the most productive time or fish bait this time of year. So to summarize schooling bass, from now until March, the bass will be schooling somewhere, whether that's in 5 feet in the back of a creek or in 40 feet off a main channel point or a main creek channel when it gets really cold. So try to have 1 or 2 rods set up just in case they're schooling. Something you can throw a long ways, something that's small like the bait fish, something with treble hooks because they're going bombastic out there and you want them to knock into it and get it because they're going crazy. Go ahead and buy some spoons. They're not super expensive. You will lose some if you vertical jig. It's just a thing that's going to happen. But go ahead and pick up some spoons, guys. Smaller ones, 1/2 ounces. Maybe slide up to 3/8 and 3/8 3/4. But a 1/2 ounce jigging spoon. A Castmaster is a great one. Cotton Cordell jigging spoons are great. War Eagle makes a real sweet jigging spoon. Just get you a few of them and make yourself learn to fish them, especially at that last bar there. When it gets cold, you're going to have to use your graph a lot. And your spoon and your depth finder are going to be super, super good teams when you're fishing real, real cold in the winter. You will stare at that graph all day and it will save your butt in the wintertime. I promise you. So now let's dive into some baits. We're going to talk pretty in depth about crankbaits and jerkbaits. Again, I'm not going to necessarily push or plug any companies. Everybody's throwing a crankbait. Most everybody's throwing some type of jerkbait. You fish the ones you like. That's fine. As long as they do the job for you, it's great. I'm going to tell you the ones I use, why, and what other options there are as well that'll do the job. So if we're going to define, when we're just talking about crankbaits, the types of them, you're going to do that based on their depth to a degree. So your surface runners or your quote-unquote wake baits are only usually going to push down a foot, depending on line size and cast and distance and retrieval, but most of them ain't meant to run more than a foot. Your shallow divers, your 3 to 6 footers, that's where your square bills usually roll. Your 1.5 KVDs, your Storm Arashi square bills, stuff like that, Bandit 100s. They're going to run in that 3 to 6 foot depth. Shallow running crankbaits. Medium divers, 6 to 10 feet. Typically that's going to be your Shad Raps, your Bandit 200s, all those normal old Bomber Model A's. I feel like medium divers where crankbaits were kind of first originated to get down to that 6 to 10 foot depth range. So most of your old school crankbaits are going to fall in this depth range. And then we slid up to your deep divers, especially for summertime fishing. Your DT16s, your DD22s, Hot Lips Express, blah, blah, blah. All those deep, deep diving crankbaits that you have to make a really long cast for and lay up on your structure appropriately so it hits it at a perfect time and effectively. And then lipless. And lipless crankbaits can be fished in any depth based on your behavior with the rod and reel in your hand. And we'll talk about that in depth in a second. The first thing that you need to understand about crankbaits is their bills. And this is a super little graph that I found that talks about what the shape of the bill will do to the bait. So we'll go over each one of them. So the top one is your typical round diver bill. Bandit 200, DT10, Bomber Model A, your standard old crankbait lip. If you notice the tail in the little picture, the zigzags are pretty wide, and your depth profile is pretty deep to start with. It dives pretty good straight down and stays deeper. So you have a wider wobble. You can tell by the zigzags of his little tail there. It's going to dive fast, but it's also, since it's a round bill, it's going to have a slight roll to the body, just like the old Rapalas did when they were first brought out. Compare that to the next one, which is your square bill or coffin bill square bills, which you don't really see a lot of coffin bill baits anymore, but you will from time to time. And that's your KVD 1.5s, your Bandit 100s, and your Speed Traps by Lord Jensen. Have that square shaped bill, that flat square bill. Still going to get that wide wobble of the tail due to the width of the bill, but if you notice, his little dotted line depth profile is much shallower, and that's because his bill is shorter compared to the one above it. So over here in the right in the summary box, you get a wide wobble, a shallow diver, and it's built to deflect. That hard, straight angled bill deflects off the bottom really well, which is typically why people throw square bills around stumps and cover. But you can see, you still, with that wider bill, you'll get that wide tail action. So the wide bill up front reflects to the tail. You still get a lot more vibration in the water. Excuse me. The next one down, the third one, the narrow diving lip. This is going to be kind of like your Shad Rat bill. Real skinny, real narrow, stuck out from the lip of the bait, almost like a jerkbait lip on a small diving, crankbait. So your Shad Rap number 7, your Little John MDs, and your Berkeley Flicker Shad all are going to have this narrow diving bill. And if you can tell, his little tail zigzag is much narrower and much calmer. So you don't get a lot of side-to-side action with the tail, don't get a lot of vibration. But due to that length of that bill sticking out, you'd still get your depth. Your depth goes on down like it's supposed to and stays down. So that particular bill, just think about a Shad Rap number 7 in your head. You have a real tight wiggle. It's going to dive pretty fast, but it gets very little water push, so you don't get a lot of vibration. The shallow roller lip is kind of going away. Not a ton of crankbaits do this, but if you've ever fished a man's baby 1-, it has this type of lip where it's all about roll, but it's a tighter roll. It's not a lot of water push. It stays shallow. So your baby 1-, your Bagley small fry crankbaits, which is a wooden crankbait that has a real natural small lip, or here lately you can look at your KVD 1.5 shallow crankbaits, and I have one coming up in a minute. But it's not meant to dive very deep, and it's meant to be a little tighter of a wobble. So you have your tight wiggle just like your Shad Rap, but this is a shallow diving bait with a slight to moderate roll, just based on the body of the bait. We'll tell you about the roll. But these are 4 bill types to where you should be able to walk in the Bass Pro Shops, look online, whatever, and look at the bill and tell what it's going to do based on this chart, and if that's going to fit what you want to do. So you should be able to look at a crankbait and figure out what it's going to do before you even take it out of the box. And the next slide will help that. Bill angles are critical to how deep your bait's going to dive. The first picture on the left there, that is the KVD 1.5 shallow. That thing's got a straight down bill. He is not meant to dive anywhere. 97, almost a 90-degree bill. If you look it up, it's diving to 3 feet on a good day, on light line, on a good cast. She ain't going to go far, but she's going to have a good little wobble and stay in that strike zone of 0 to 2.5, 3 feet. Good spot to fish this bait is around vegetation, shallow wood cover, rocks right up next to the bank. But when you look at a bill like that, you're not going to get down to 5 or 7. And that's okay. That's not what it was designed to do. Moving on to the old 1.5 square bill. Everybody's thrown one of these now at this point. It's got a 135 degree angle. She's going to dive to about 5 or 6 feet. That's what she was built to do. She's going to deflect real well off cover. It's great with stumps, shallow wood, rock piles, what have you. But it's not meant to go deep. Go to the next fella. You got a 160 degree angle. That is a KVD 1.5 deep. And the reason I did this particular series of baits is not because I think they're the best. It's because they're all the same body size. The body shape and the body size are all the same. If you'll notice, just the bill has changed. And that's the difference of everything of how deep they dive. So the straighter the bill, the deeper they're going to dive. That's the best way I can tell you. So you look at a little old bill that's bent up in this first bait on the left here that's bent straight down. That thing ain't going to go nowhere. And then you look on the far right at the crawfish colored crankbait where the bill is all the way almost straight out the nose. You know he's meant to dive. And the fella in the middle, you can kind of guesstimate 5 to 7. So look at your bill angles. It'll really help you think about what a crankbait's going to do. So, wood versus plastic. Not a lot of people think about wood crankbaits anymore, but there's a few that do. My favorite is a Bagley Balsa B. There's a couple other companies that make wooden crankbaits, but that Balsa B is a tough little classic. Wood is extremely buoyant, so it's going to float really fast when you stop it. It's also going to be harder to pull down into the water column. So most of these baits are going to be shallow running baits that I use. But they deflect well because they bounce off and float up really quick off cover. Usually they don't have rattles due to the fact that they're wood and they're not hollow. And their paint jobs are going to be real, simple paint jobs. They're going to be clear coat covered, and typically they're going to be real plain looking paint jobs. That's mostly because you can't get any translucency through a hollow plastic body. Excuse me. So, because they're wood, you're also going to get a unique action to each individual bait, because not all wood is the same. One piece of balsa and another piece of balsa are going to be different. But that's the fun thing about it, is you'll find one bait in a series that runs exactly like you want it, and you won't be able to catch fish on any of them but that in your mind. It's probably not the case, but you'll find a honey hole of a bait that you don't want to give up because he's built exactly like you want him to run, and nobody else can do it. So it's fun to play with wooden baits in that sense. But they're usually a little bit more expensive because they're balsa and there are fewer options as opposed to plastic. Plastic is going to dive better than wood because of how you can weight it. It's less buoyant. It's easier to mechanic based on how the aerodynamics, the hydrodynamics, all this good stuff. Plastic is easy to develop. It will deflect well, but not as good as wood, because nothing's going to float as fast as wood off the bottom. Easy to find them with rattles. Most every crankbait company has rattles in them. Some will be silent. You can choose that option, but most of them have rattles because the bait, again, is hollow and you can fill them with BBs and make them rattle. You can have better paint jobs because it's plastic. You can have translucency to them. You pretty much going to find that every bait in the series run very, very similar. There's not going to be really one that kicks off a different direction because it's plastic, it's made in bulk, and they're all pretty uniform. But they're much cheaper, and you can find them anywhere. Walmart, anywhere. I've seen grocery stores at big lakes that still sell crankbaits. So you can find an old crankbait somewhere, wherever you are. Talking about their diving, when you throw a crankbait out, obviously as soon as you start winding, it's not at your desired depth unless you're fishing super shallow. Most of us, this is a 10-foot DT10 here on the right, and this is its depth, I guess, graph of how it will behave. Rapala puts these out. But anyway, if you're going to make a 70-foot cast like this fella has in the picture, for the first 10 feet, it's not making it down to its depth yet. So it's diving down. Then it's going to stay down at its depth, and then the last 5 feet it's coming up. So if you're wanting to fish a rock pile, a hump, a tree, whatever, you need to make sure that you throw it appropriately based on where that piece of structure is in your cast graph. So if it's at 65 feet and you throw it 70, you're not going to get it. Subsequently, if it's right in the middle at 30, 35 feet, you may not need to throw all the way to 70. Maybe you can throw to 60 or 55 and hit it just right on the down tick. So it's important to think about how deep the structure is, how far away you are from it, and where you want to put that bait to line it up just right. Most crankbait curves are like this, but not this dramatic. The DT series of Rapala baits are designed to stay down, get down there quick and stay down. Most crankbait curves will be a little bit more parabolic than this, a little bit more smoother bowl shaped, but this DT10 is a really good example of a bait getting there and staying there before it comes up. So just keep in mind what your bait's got to do to get through a cast, and it'll help you position your boat better and position your cast better based on your bait. Trolling. A lot of guys do it. I've done it some. A lot of people in the winter do it. Kayaking, it's easy to troll if you have a rod holder because you can move real slow and real controlled. Most crankbait companies, this is Bandit, will have a trolling chart. Typically they're based off 10-pound mono. Rapala has a ton of these because a lot of Rapalas are trolled up north for walleye. And those guys really want to know how far back they need to be if they're freelining a crankbait without lead, without a weight on the bait or anything like that, to know where it can dive and be free. So choose a bait that'll pull down to your desired depth. This is a Bandit 300, a really common medium to medium deep diving crankbait. And if you'll notice on the graph, on the left side, on the vertical column is how deep it's going to pull. And on the horizontal column is how many feet back you need of line from the reel or from your boat, for example. So if I wanted to troll this guy down to 14, 15 feet, you can bring your finger down to 15 on the vertical bar and follow it across to where it T-bones in with the curve. And bring your finger down, and I need 90 freaking feet of line out to get that thing down at 15 feet. That's something you can think about as you're pulling away from the bait once you've thrown it out. But this is a super good way of figuring out whether or not a bait will even get down where you want it, or whether it'll get down where you want it in a comfortable, distance of line for you. As a general rule, the more line out, the deeper it goes to a degree. Obviously, that curve flattens out because there's so much line bagging in the water, that little bill can't pull it down no further regardless. So that's why the curve isn't just straight down. It does bend out to where you're not getting as much juice as the squeeze is worth. But typically, if you stay in that first half of that curve, it's being super efficient. So use a rod holder and use it in a flatter position to keep that bait down as much as possible instead of sticking it way up in the air 6 feet. Try to keep that rod tip down as flat as you can and as comfortable as you can. You need to set your drag accordingly when you're trolling these open hook baits because you ain't ready for the bite. I promise you. You think you are, but most of the time you ain't. You just moving along and the rod bows over and there's a fish. And then you have to grab a hold of it and land the fish. So it just, make sure you set your drag accordingly to where it'll pull on a little bit. It won't pull the rod out of the rod holder and it won't break your line. So set your drag, let it slip a little bit. Once that rod gets bent over about a third of the way down, should pull the bait into the fish. You have time to pick the rod up and address the fish and see what you need to do to bring her on in. But keep your drag in mind if you're going to troll. And this, again, is very effective in the fall and winter when those fish are suspending out in that 15 to 20 foot range and they're eating shad. So think about trolling, but set up for it if you're going to do it. Electronics help. So, special case in crankbaits. Lipless. We talked about it before. Hard to define how deep it'll go because it sinks. And its rate of fall is based on its weight and your line density. If you throw a 1/4 ounce red eye shad, which is that bait at the top there, a 1/4 ounce red eye shad on 10-pound mono versus 17-pound mono, the rate of fall is going to change. So keep all that in mind if you're going to vertical jig a bait, or if you're going to spot fish a lipless bait around a dock or a bridge piling or what have you. The lighter the line, the faster it's going to fall. Cool thing about a lipless is it doesn't dive down. It basically stays where you put it when you let it fall. So if you let it fall all the way to the bottom and you pop it up and get it running, he's going to try to stay down there based on your line density and based on the speed of retrieve, pretty much 3/4 to most of the way back your cast before it rises up. So it stays at your desired depth longer because it's not trying to rise, because it doesn't float like all your other diving crankbaits. It does have a super tight wiggle because the bill for this bait that makes it wiggle is actually his forehead above his eye, between the nose and the line tie. So it's a very narrow bill on this crankbait built into his head, and it's very long. So a little more shake to it the wider it gets. Like on a red eye shad, it's a little wider than like at that Bill Lewis rattle trap down below. But you can vary that with companies and sizes and such. But typically, real tight wobble, lots of beads. Good grief, lots of beads and noise. Some of them even have a 1-knocker tungsten bead in them now for a different sound. But typically, they're going to have just a little bit of shimmy and a lot of noise to them coming through the water. It's an excellent search bait in the fall and the spring, because you basically just chuck and wind it. It looks just like a shad, and they'll come running. So lipless crankbaits, fun little bait to explore, completely different style, a lot of fun in the fall. And then one of my favorites is the wake bait. So this is that surface runner crankbait we talked about early on. Meant to stay on near the surface, meant to push a V-wake across it. The bait on the top is the Jackal Mikey. Bait in the middle is an H2O Express wake bait from Academy, and the bait at the bottom is a live target. I think that's their pumpkin seed or bluegill, whatever, sunfish jointed wake bait. I haven't tried the one at the bottom yet, but I'm probably going to in the spring. So hope to be playing with that. But those other two at the top, oh man, they catch a lot of fish this time of year. Basically, it don't dive. It just wobbles on the surface to a degree. You can pull it down to about 6 to 8 inches. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to stay right on the surface and make that V-wake and that pulse across the top, looking like a shad that's running away. So excellent side-to-side searching or rolling body, depending on how the bill is shaped, how the body is shaped. I like to throw it around docks, trees, and stumps. I will throw it around riprap first thing in the morning as well. But wake bait, easy topwater to fish that not a lot of people really fish right now. I know the whopper plopper's hot. I know throwing a buzz bait with a frog on it is hot. This will be additional to those as far as showing them something new on top. Think about a wake bait next time. Guys, that one in the middle right there is only about $4 or $5. So if you want to try one, I recommend an H2O Express wake bait from Academy. I'm not popping them or pumping them or anything. I'm trying to get you into a wake bait cheap. That's the only reason. If I had to do it over again, I'd buy a bunch of Mikeys, but they $19, $20 a piece, and my wife would shoot me. So if you want to try a wake bait, go ahead and pick you up a couple colors of that H2O Express in the middle there and see if you like them. If you don't, come find me. I'll buy them from you because I love them. All right, so what are we going to throw these crankbaits on? These are the setups. This is just my opinion, but these are the setups that I'm going to use on those different baits. And I'll try to go slow through this stuff and talk about logic. But in general, if you just wanted to save a screenshot of this and then fuss at me later when you're at the store and the guy told you that's wrong, that's fine. But I took some time on this slide and thought about how I would rig it up. And this is how I would set up crankbaits based on what they are and how I fish. So the wake bait, you're basically treating it like a cranking topwater. You still have to keep in mind though, that it's got open hooks, smaller treble hooks that you need to be careful with, and you need to keep him on top. He's meant to stay on top. So whether you want it to be real accurate or real long distance, what I like is a 6 to a 6.5 foot medium heavy rod. If I'm trying to get more accurate and throw it real tight into cover, or make real accurate casts around docks or what have you, the shorter the rod, the better. But I do get the fact that if you want to bomb it down the line of a point or a big open grass mat or whatever, that a longer rod will help. So somewhere in that range. You can go up to a 7 if you want. I'm not going to, because there are more times than not that I want it to be an accurate cast versus a long cast. So anyway, a 6 to a 6.5 foot medium heavy, whatever reel you like, just don't go slow, because you're going to have to burn him sometimes to draw a strike. So I typically look at a 6 to a 7 gear ratio reel. 12 to 17 pound mono. It depends on whether or not you think you need stretch. If the fish are nipping at it, you can't set your drag like you want, they're line shy, whatever, you can go down to 12 pound mono. I've done it. It works fine. It doesn't hold the bait all the way up top like 17 does, but 17 don't cast as far. So you kind of have to meet in the middle. If I had to pick one, I'd pick 14 pound Stren Original and go with it. But if you put 12 on there, you'll be able to huck it a lot further. So just make it work for you. With the wake bait, I'm typically fishing 14 pound mono. I'm going to throw this thing everywhere I can when they're on it. I like it around laydowns, around those tree limbs that dip down into the water where those fish will suspend over them, and you bring that wake bait over top of them, and all of a sudden the old spotted bass comes running out and gets it. I love it around docks, especially in sunny days. If you'll parallel the docks right where the shade line is, those fish will usually run out from a dock and eat it. If they're aggressive that time of day, typically heat of the summer is when your docks are most important. Over stumps, it's excellent, and like I said already, we parallel it around riprap a lot. Great little bait, guys. Can't speak enough about it. If you ain't tried a wake bait, give it a shot. I think you'll be pleased with your new topwater tool. Shallow running crankbaits. Again, think about your 1.5 square bills, basically, when you talk about this section. 6 to 7 foot medium, again, accuracy versus distance. Whatever you want to do. I don't throw anything faster than a 6 because the crankbait's not meant to work at a 7, in my opinion. It doesn't deflect as well. It over rolls. It doesn't get its good noise. I like a 5 to a 6. You go to a 7 if you want, but I think it's built to be run at a 5 to a 6. 10 to 14 pound mono again, or fluoro. 10 pounds is going to let it go easier. 14 is going to be able to hold up a little bit better in a bigger fish situation, which these can catch some massive fish. So let that play out like you want. Pretty much the same kind of cover, stumps, rocks, docks, and points. Wherever that 7 foot, 8 foot depth range, whatever cover you can find there, this guy will pretty much come through it unless it's thick grass or lily pads. It's meant to deflect through wood. It's meant to bounce off stumps and rocks. Excellent fish catcher. There are days when you can just put the trolling motor down or paddle around and throw a square bill all day and get bit. I really like that shallow running crankbait zone. It's probably my favorite other than the wake bait. Medium, think about your Shad Rap number 7s. Think about your Bomber Model A's. Think about Bandit 200s. Same thing, 6 to 7 foot medium. But you're going to, again, dictate your line size on how deep you want it to go. So I don't go up to 14 no more. I go 10 to 12 because it's not going to get down to its desired depth with 14. It just can't pull it down enough. So if you want it to reach that, 8, 9, 10 foot range, you need to put it on some line that'll let it get there in a moderate cast. It's not super duper long or trolling. So 10 to 12 pound mono or fluoro is where I like to live with it. And set your drag accordingly. If the lighter the line, the more you need to set your drag and let your rod load up and slip a little bit so you don't pop your line, especially if you start hitting some 4 and 5 pound, big fish. But just be careful with that. But if you want it to dive to a certain depth, you really got to stay light on your line. Again, points, rocks, and docks, everything offshore a little bit, something a little bit deeper where the fish are holding up. You want to tick the bottom but not grind into the bottom. So just manage that based with your line density. And again, going back to the rod length, it's all about accuracy versus distance with me. The shorter the rod, more accurate I can be. Longer the rod, obviously, the further distance I can get my cast. So build that the way you want it, but that's kind of the range to stay in. Deep diving crankbaits, we're talking everything from DT16s, Norman DD22s, Man's 20 Plus, Hot Lips Express, all that good stuff. You're going to want a longer rod. You're not going to be making short, accurate casts with deep diving crankbaits. I'm sorry, you're just not. So I'm going to go 6, 7 foot, may even go bigger if you want to. I don't usually like throwing anything longer than 7 off a kayak, but you can. I've seen it. It's not comfortable, but I've done it. Usually those deep diving crankbaits are heavier, so I'm going to say medium to medium heavy. If it's a big old 3/4 ounce Hot Lips Express, you're not going to do it on a medium. So think about that. Again, that goes back to volume 1 with weight of your rod versus weight of your bait. Anyhow, I'm going to have a slow gear ratio reel. These baits are not meant to be fished fast. They will not pull down right. They will not stay down right. So keep it at a slow reel. This is the only time I'm going to limit you to one number there. But keep it at a slow reel. Anywhere between 5.4 and 5.7 is fine. Even 5.2 if you want. But keep a slow reel. 12 to 14 pound mono again. Fluoro. You want to dive down, but you want a little bit stronger line due to the weight of the bait and size of the fish those big baits produce. Just be careful with that. Again, set your drag appropriately because you can hit some real giant fish. And then this is a spot where you're going to be fishing long points, ledge drop-offs, and actually under-schooling fish is how I learned how to fish a DT16. The fish would come up in school. Everybody else would be throwing top water to catch the little guys, and I'd pick up my DT16 and huck it all the way past the school, crank it down real fast to get it down 15 feet, and then drag it and catch those bigger largemouth. They're sitting down there lazy under those schoolers eating those shad. So keep that in mind too for deep crankbaits. A little secret there. You can throw it under schooling fish and catch bigger ones to a degree. With a lipless, again, the length of the rod is accuracy versus distance. Most of the time I'm making a little bit longer casts. I like a 6.6 medium personally. If you're throwing a 1/4 ounce lipless bait, a medium is perfect. If you're going to throw a 1/2 ounce to a 3/4 ounce, super spot or rattle trap, you probably want a medium heavy rod, a little bit longer as well to hold that weight. 6 to 7, you can fish these a lot faster because they don't have a wide wobble, depending on if they're chasing, if you're trying to root it through dirt, whatever. I like 12-pound fluorocarbon. If you're throwing a lot shallower, you can step up to 14-pound mono. It's going to hold it up a little bit more. If you're trying to get it down, look at fluoro, look at 10. Again, set your drag. And then you can throw this thing anywhere. Up shallow around stumps, through grass, around riprap, under schoolers. Again, you let it fall. It's pretty limitless about where you can throw a lipless crankbait because it sinks. And you can, design the cast based on where you want it to come, based on where you allow it to fall, and how slow you fish it to keep it down at that depth. So lipless is really fun. It's also really universally complicated in that it's not predictable. You can basically fish it anywhere you want based on your rod tip height, your line density, the speed of your reel, the weight of the bait. It's fun to dial one in, looks like you want it, because it's so much versatility to it and just in your hands and how you approach each cast. So I like lipless crankbait fishing, but some people don't really care for it as much as square billing at this point. But keep that in mind. If you want to try it, it's a lot of fun. It's pretty fun to play with. So we'll slide into jerkbaits. Not as complicated. It's really not. If you break down jerkbaits, there's 3 steps to go through. And I could be doing y'all a disservice, but this is me and how I break down jerkbaits with demystifying them. If to me it was a bait that was very mystifying, you don't fish them like you do other lip baits. Tons of guys are propping different baits that do crazy things. But if you step back a little bit and think about how they're designed and what they do, it's not that complicated. Step one is it a shallow or deep? And that set right there on the left is a Rattling Rogue from Smithwick. Obviously, you can tell which one's shallow and which one's deep. The little small bill under the chin versus a real long, gigantic bill out from the nose. Again, going back to crankbait bills, you know which one's going to dive deeper. You know, that long one sticking out the front is going to dive deeper. That other one on the top there, that green-backed one, is going to dive shallower with a wider wobble. Then, do you want a rolling or a twitching bait? If you'll notice the X-wrap there at the top in the middle with the red tail feather, it has a more round lip versus the I can't remember. The pointer, the Lucky Craft pointer right there on the bottom, the chartreuse shad with the purple back. It has a more straight out lip that kind of curves at the end, but it's a straight out lip, so it's going to twitch more than roll. For some odd reason, when Rapala invented the X-Wrap, they called it a slash bait. It's a jerk bait, but they called it a slash bait, and it's because if you look at one, I don't have a good picture of it here, it has kind of a teardrop round lip out the front. So it doesn't necessarily just jerk side to side. It actually rolls a little bit and flashes that side. So just look at that. A difference in action can be key with jerk baits. So I like to have a few different brands with me. And then whether it suspends or floats, the bait on the top is a Husky Jerk by Rapala. I think it's a Husky Jerk 9, maybe a 7. I think it's a 7. They suspend. They have weights on their belly so that they don't rise as fast. And then, of course, on the bottom, you got the old Rapala Floating Original. Pure balsa wood, no other weights. It's going to float right back to the surface when you twitch it. So these are the 3 things you need to ask yourself. And then pick your color and rattle and size and all that. But these are the 3 jerkbait types that you need to think about what you want to go in and purchase based on what you want to try that day. So I'm trying to just demystify it a little bit. As far as setups, bait caster, I'm typically going to be throwing my bigger, heavier jerk baits just because it's hard to throw those little bitty ones on bait cast tackle. I'm going to look at 10 to 14 pound mono or fluoro, whether I'm trying to keep it up or down. Typically, again, 6.5 to 7 foot medium action rods with a composite blank in them. So a lot of flex in them, like your cranking sticks. It's not, pure graphite. It's got fiberglass in it to make it a lot more floppy. If you know what an ugly stick is, it's fiberglass, so it's got a lot of flex to it. Well, I want that in my crankbait rod too, and my jerkbait rod, because that's going to let it flex a little bit on the pull and let the fish eat it, because you're jerking the bait, and then the fish grabs it right either when you complete a jerk or when you go to jerk again, and you don't want to pull the bait out of his mouth. Have a smooth drag again, open hook, treble hooks, let the fish take the bait down before you load into them good. And again, the bait caster's for my heavier baits. Spinning, I'm going to use 6 to 10 pound mono based on the size of the bait, how far I'm trying to get it down, clarity of the water, all that good stuff. Again, 6 to 7 foot medium, however long you're trying to throw it and how you want to twitch it. A smooth drag again. This is going to be your lighter baits. So, talking about retrieves, the twitch pause is the most common. If you want to get on YouTube and get off this video and look at Kevin Van Dam and how he fishes jerk baits, it's extremely the twitch pause on steroids. He is an aggressive jerkbait fisherman and catches a ton of fish on it, but it's the most common. You keep slacking your line before and after you jerk it. So you're going to jerk and point the rod right back at the bait, jerk, point the rod back at the bait. But you pick up your cadence based on what the fish tell you, whether it's a jerk, let it sit, jerk. So that would be a 2 and then 1, or a 4 and then 1, or whatever. You'll figure out what the fish like that day based on playing around with your twitches. When it gets colder, use suspending baits and do a longer pause between jerks, because those fish are typically looking up and they're slow to come up and approach a bait, and then when you go to twitch it again, they'll go ahead and eat it. So It's hard to do, but sometimes you need to let that bait sit for 5-6 seconds before you twitch it again, even longer, which kills me, but it works. So the more erratic action you put on a bait, the harder to predict its swim path. So if you're jerking a bait around trees or docks or grass or stumps or something like that, when you do this, you don't really know where she's going to twitch. She's very erratic. So if you do the jerk, jerk, pull, he could dart off 6 inches to the left, and then the next time you jerk, come only 4 inches to the right. So keep that in mind if you're trying to drive it right down an alley. Give yourself a little bit of room so you don't hang him up. And again, these are going to be my shallow diving baits. So your X-Rap 8s, Lucky Craft Pointer 78s, that shallow Smithwick Rogue, small Husky Jerks, things like that. Then the next one, which is something don't nobody do much but me that I can tell, is kind of like Carolina rigging the jerkbait. I don't really know how else to put it, but anyway, it's like a drag pull kind of thing. So I use a 7-foot rod. I use glass, fiberglass rod, a cranking stick. And when it's real cold, like in February when I'm throwing a jerkbait over shallow water or a hump, I wind the bait down. After I've made the cast, I wind the bait down to its diving depth, and then I do kind of a slow drag, constant pull like a Carolina rig. So what that does is it's not erratic, but it pulls that bait slow down, and then I take the slack up and do it again. So it's showing a suspended jerkbait in a slower, more natural look in cold water. I figured it out on Lake Baden in a tournament in February. They weren't really wanting a Pointer 78 in that jerk, twitch, pause kind of action. I put on a Pointer 100 on a different rod and did this slow, constant drag pull method and filled the box. So to me, it made a difference. It could have just been the bait size. I'm not saying it wasn't, but I feel like it was due to the action as well in the deep dead of winter. So I like this with a suspending bait versus a floating bait, and usually my little bit heavier, a little bit deeper baits like the Pointer 100 to stay down a little bit more. It's like I said, it's almost like Carolina rigging, that particular action with your rod in a jerkbait. So keep that in mind. If you want to ever throw a jerkbait in the dead of winter, this is another option for how to retrieve it. Cool thing is there's tons of options, guys, with jerkbaits. The company on the left's Rapala. Think that's the Husky Jerk there. Tons of different options. The bait in the middle there is a Smithwick Rogue. Top right's your Rapala X-Rap, which is a completely different bait. If you had to pick a bait to try something different, it'd be the X-Rap for sure. And then on the bottom right is the Lucky Craft Pointer series. So tons of companies, tons of actions, tons of colors. Plenty to choose from. So my last slide. Things to think about crankbaits and jerkbaits. You're going to match the hatch. Typically it's going to be shad, but it can be sunfish, crawls, and minnows as well. That's going to be based on your colors, where you're throwing the bait, the water clarity there, and your depth you're trying to fish. That's how you pick out your crankbaits. So I'm not going to tell you what bait to pick out. I'm not going to tell you what company to go look for. But this is what you're going to pick, whether you think about it or not. When you go pick up a crankbait to tie on the next day, these are the things that go through your head. You just don't write them down on paper. I done wrote them down. So you're going to think about the color of the bait, where you're going to fish it, the water clarity there, and the depth before you tie on a crankbait. So keep those things in mind before you pick one out. And your rod and line are crucial for working the bait, for setting the hook, for landing the fish. We talked about rods and reels and lines in Volume 1, about how important it is to keep in mind what all of them do as their job. You're going to want a soft rod with some backbone to load into a good fish, but a soft tip, because treble hooks are the devil. Believe it or not, they hang your clothes, they hang line, they hang everything they ain't supposed to. And when you put them in a fish at 15 miles an hour, they still can come to the surface and throw it. Don't know how, but they do. So having a soft ryle with a smooth drag you can approach a fish when he's got treble hooks is real key to me to getting the fish in the boat. And then your line size, getting the bait down where you need it. The lighter the line, the better. However, if you pop a fish, you better have a smooth drag because there's a lot of stretch in that line and there's a lot of pull on little old treble hooks. So keep all that in mind when you're building a rod and reel setup. And then start throwing them now, guys. Fall and spring are the best. Fall, some people tell you, is even better. I kind of treat them both the same, but fall typically is shad and spring is typically crawfish. So there you go with that. But you can throw a shad colored crankbait right now pretty much any lake and run into some fish. Whether or not they're schooling, they're running the banks, they're right by a stump, a dock, whatever. But gain some confidence in a bait or two now while the bass are feeding up. While it's a good opportunity, try some new baits. Figure out what they're good at and what they're not so you can add some new weapons to your arsenal. It's always fun to be able to look at a bait and say, yeah, that works this time of year. I've tried it. So step out of your comfort zone, grab a couple new crankbaits and jerkbaits and have some fun. I hope I helped you. That's the end of the class. I've hoped I've helped you pick out some baits and figure out why crankbaits and jerkbaits do the things they do. Again, great time between now and the end of November probably to be throwing these baits on most of your lakes around the south, especially around Charlotte, North Carolina. And again, I hope I've helped you with schooling fish, finding them, tracking them, not being overwhelmed by them. Use your electronics as it gets colder. And then, picking out a crankbait or jerkbait that'll do what you want to do. Again, I'm not going to pop companies on here, and there's a bunch of different square bill companies. There's a bunch of different deep diving companies. The wake bait I did put on there specifically because there's only a handful of companies making a real good wake bait, and I've tried most of them, and those are the ones I have the most confidence in that I've showed you there. So thanks again, guys, for watching Volume 3. I'll be teaching Volume 4 about mid-November, maybe a little bit later, probably around Thanksgiving, a little bit earlier at the restaurant. And then after the holidays, once I get back home from family, I'll try to do the voiceover of it. But I'll figure out what the topic is here soon and we'll roll with it. But again, I appreciate you watching School and Fish 101 and Crankbaits and Jerkbaits. If you have any questions, please give me a holler, comment on here, throw me a message on Facebook. Love to talk baits, so it ain't gonna hurt my feelings at all. Y'all have an excellent night. Get on the water. Talk to you later.